Wild and Hops.
The dream team.
Stop in the name of the... I'm pulling my ears. Never pull up on his ears. I have to help myself.
Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to the Q-Man channel. If you are new here, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button to support the channel. Today, we are going to be discussing the movie Zootopia 2, coming out in 2025. The narrative picks up a few years after the events of the first film, finding Judy Hopps deeply entrenched in her role at the Zootopia Police Department, having firmly established herself as a dedicated and effective officer, though the shadows of past prejudices still occasionally linger, like a persistent low hum beneath the city's vibrant surface. Nick Wilde, meanwhile, has fully transitioned from a smooth-talking hustler to a respected, if still slightly cynical partner, leveraging his street smarts to navigate the complexities of police work alongside Judy. Their established synergy is palpable, a blend of Judy's unwavering optimism and meticulous procedure, tempered by Nick's intuitive grasp of the underworld. The central conflict ignites with a series of highly sophisticated thefts targeting high-tech infrastructure, specifically relating to the city's advanced sustainable energy grid, which Judy had initially helped champion during her early days as a community liaison. These aren't smash-and-grab jobs. They suggest an inside knowledge, a meticulous planning that baffles the department's veterans. The targets are seemingly random, a power regulator here, a geothermal sensor there, but the pattern slowly emerges. Someone is systematically destabilizing the very systems meant to keep Zootopia running efficiently, pushing the metropolis back towards the resource scarcity that predated the city's integration era. Judy, driven by her foundational belief in making Zootopia a better, fairer place, dives headfirst into the investigation. Her relentless pursuit of the truth often puts her at odds with Chief Bogo, who favors a more conventional brute force approach to policing, especially as public anxiety rises due to rolling blackouts. Nick, using the contacts he cultivated in his past life, the foxes, the weasels, the creatures who operate just outside the spotlight, begins tracing the specialized tools used in the heists, leading them down rabbit holes filled with obscure black market engineering components. The investigation takes an unexpected turn when they discover the thefts are not about sabotage for its own sake, but about collecting unique components for a single massive project. They start looking into former city contractors and disgraced engineers. A key piece of evidence surfaces: a specialized ultrasonic frequency emitter, historically used in deep mine excavation, repurposed here. This leads them to the outskirts, the forgotten industrial zones where older, less integrated species often reside, feeling left behind by Zootopia's gleaming modernity. It is revealed that the mastermind is a highly intelligent, overlooked engineer, a badger perhaps, or a lesser-known rodent, who feels the city owes them a debt for dismissing their groundbreaking, albeit unorthodox theories, on energy transfer years prior. This character believes Zootopia has grown too reliant on visible, easily controlled energy sources, and seeks to prove their superior method by forcing a complete system failure, thereby demonstrating the necessity of their rejected technology. The climax unfolds during a massive city festival, intentionally timed by the antagonist to maximize disruption. Judy and Nick race against time to locate the central installation, a makeshift transmission tower built atop an abandoned water treatment plant. The confrontation is less about brute force and more about technical acumen. Judy must use her knowledge of city infrastructure diagrams, gleaned from her early planning sessions, to pinpoint the weak points in the antagonist's setup, while Nick engages in a tense distraction, utilizing his agility and quick wit to disarm accompanying henchmen, a mix of disgruntled, underemployed technicians of various species. In the final moments, as the energy surge threatens to overload the entire grid, Judy doesn't just shut the system down. Remembering her early inspirations from police academy lectures about proactive maintenance, she reroutes the excess energy into an emergency ballast system she and Nick had previously identified during a routine inspection of neglected utility tunnels. The crisis is averted not through simple destruction, but through intelligent adaptation and utilizing overlooked resources, reinforcing the film's subtle message that Zootopia's strength lies not just in its grand architecture, but in the overlooked corners and the dedication of those willing to see beyond the obvious. Nick shares a wry glance with Judy. They saved the day again, proving that the synergy between the carrot-top cop and the sly fox remains Zootopia's most potent defense. The final scene shows them back at the precinct, filing paperwork, the city humming smoothly once more, a testament to their hard-won partnership. Judy Hopps, her police vest feeling like a second skin now, navigated the polished floors of Precinct 1 with the practiced ease of a veteran, though the exhaustion etched around her bright eyes betrayed the relentless nature of her work. Her idealism hadn't dimmed, but it had been tempered by the constant, bureaucratic pushback and the low-grade suspicion that still clung to her in certain older sections of the Zootopia Police Department hierarchy. She carried the weight of proving herself daily, a persistent little tug of imposter syndrome that she fought off with extra paperwork and flawless case reports. Nick Wilde, positioned beside her during briefings, seemed utterly unfazed. His tailored, slightly rumpled attire contrasted sharply with the crisp uniforms around them, a visual metaphor for his continued comfortable existence on the fringe of propriety. He had traded his old scams for intricate police profiling, finding a bizarre satisfaction in using his keen ability to read intentions, a skill honed by years of grifting, to decipher true malice rather than mere opportunism. Their banter, once sharp with tentative affection, was now a finely tuned shorthand exchange that bypassed the need for words in tense situations. When the infrastructure thefts began, Judy saw it immediately as an attack on the very foundation she'd worked so hard to build, the promise of a unified, resource-secure Zootopia. Her memories of those initial community outreach programs, selling the vision of sustainable growth to skeptical herbivores and carnivores alike, fueled her investigation. She pored over schematics late into the night, driven by the fear of seeing Zootopia revert to the segmented, fearful city it once was. Chief Bogo, ever the pragmatist, saw only the rising political pressure and demanded quick arrests, constantly snapping at Judy for focusing on complex technical details when the public wanted a visible perpetrator in cuffs. Nick, sensing Judy's mounting stress, adopted a more overtly soothing, almost paternal role, often bringing her lukewarm, slightly burnt coffee from that one dodgy roadside stand that somehow still served the best creamers in the city. A small anchor of normalcy. Tracing the ultrasonic emitter led them deep into the forgotten underbelly of the financial district, areas designed for species who needed robust, non-flashy utilities. They interviewed a grizzled old groundhog who remembered the initial engineering blueprints being shelved decades ago, shaking his head sadly about how the flashy mammals always get the budget, never the sensible ones. This environment perfectly suited Nick's investigative style. He moved through the shadows of abandoned warehouses with fluid grace, his past connections, the ones who owed him favors, or perhaps just feared his silence, providing cryptic but vital breadcrumbs about the sale of rare military-grade capacitors. He recalled vividly a time when acquiring such items meant real danger. Now, it just meant navigating layers of digital encryption and outdated paperwork, a testament to how much the world, and he, had changed. The antagonist, revealed to be a brilliant but deeply embittered engineer, a stoic Eurasian badger named Silas, wasn't motivated by traditional greed. Silas saw Zootopia's reliance on the massive, centralized grid as a weakness, a beautiful, fragile lie. His inspiration stemmed from a tragic incident early in his career, where his independent, resilient energy design for a smaller community was rejected in favor of a cheaper, mass-produced system that subsequently failed during a minor storm, causing significant loss. Silas felt betrayed by the system that promised progress, but delivered uniformity. His emotional core was rooted in proving that true resilience came from distributed, complex systems, not monolithic control. The final confrontation at the reservoir's pumping station was chaotic. While Nick expertly maneuvered around Silas's heavily modified security drones, his reflexes, honed from dodging police cruisers years ago, now applied to avoiding energized coils. Judy was locked in a mental battle with the control panel. She didn't just see wires. She saw the city map, the flowcharts she had memorized years ago, recognizing the systemic vulnerability Silas exploited. The air crackled with raw energy. Judy, remembering a late-night study session with her mentor, a wise old utility specialist who stressed the concept of managed overflow, didn't resort to cutting the power. Instead, her hands flying across the interface, she forced the excess energy not into destruction, but into the massive dormant ballast tanks she knew existed beneath the city's main transit hub, the very tanks designed for catastrophic contingencies that the modern administration had forgotten existed. As the lights flickered and stabilized, Silas, defeated not by force, but by an unexpected, intelligent application of existing infrastructure, simply slumped against the wall, muttering about the blindness of progress. Nick approached Judy, not with a joke, but with a rare, genuine look of pride mixed with relief. He pulled her into a brief, tight hug amidst the residual ozone smell, whispering, "You see the whole map, Carrots? Always have." Returning to the precinct, the silence as they filed their joint report felt earned, a quiet acknowledgement that their partnership was not just effective, but essential to the beating heart of Zootopia itself. The aftermath of the near catastrophe brought a subtle but profound shift in the dynamics within Zootopia, particularly concerning the internal politics of the ZPD. Chief Bogo, while still gruff and demanding, showed a flicker of grudging respect for the unorthodox methods that had saved the city, tacitly easing the pressure on Judy's innovative approaches, though he'd never admit it aloud to anyone other than perhaps his therapist. The incident highlighted the growing divide between the glossy, new aspects of Zootopia and the crucial, older infrastructure often maintained by less visible species. Judy found herself increasingly drawn to the utility and maintenance departments, realizing that true civic protection extended far beyond street-level patrols. It involved understanding the forgotten arteries of the metropolis. She began championing initiatives to audit and upgrade the city's older subterranean systems, drawing on her early experience in community outreach to garner surprisingly strong support from the very engineers who felt marginalized, like Silas, even if he was currently incarcerated. Nick, on the other hand, found his unique skills suddenly in high demand at a higher level. His ability to navigate the murky moral waters and his inherent distrust of pristine facades made him an unofficial consultant for internal affairs, investigating whispers of graft and complacency among city council members who had ignored maintenance reports to funnel funds toward flashier projects, precisely the environment Silas had railed against. Nick approached this new role with his characteristic dry wit, finding the intricacies of white-collar corruption far more predictable than street crime, though it lacked the immediate thrill. He often teased Judy about her sudden interest in blueprints and sewage flow, reminding her that while she was busy worrying about pressure valves, he was tracking down a sneaky otter laundering funds through a chain of artisanal nut butter shops. Their professional divergence, however, only strengthened their personal bond. They were each anchoring the other in their respective new realities, Judy grounding Nick in procedural ethics, and Nick ensuring Judy didn't get lost in the sheer volume of bureaucratic minutiae she now embraced. A new, more insidious threat began to manifest, one that didn't involve explosions or power grids, but rather the fabric of social trust itself. Small, targeted campaigns of misinformation began circulating through Zootopia's burgeoning digital networks. These weren't the crude propaganda pieces of the past. They were sophisticated, algorithmically tailored messages designed to subtly amplify old stereotypes, sowing division between recently integrated predator and prey communities by questioning the sincerity of their newfound peace. One viral narrative suggested that prey species were hoarding resources, while another implied that predators were secretly organized for a coordinated return to savagery, always framed as just asking questions rather than outright accusations. Judy recognized the pattern. Someone was trying to undo the unity she and Nick had fought so hard to achieve, weaponizing doubt in the digital age. This required a completely different skill set, pushing both partners into unfamiliar territory where instinct often failed against carefully constructed, anonymous falsehoods, forcing them to collaborate with cyber forensics experts who were often as baffled by the technology as they were by interspecies politics. Judy felt a chilling sense of déjà vu as she stared at the projected data visualizations in the small, windowless conference room dedicated to digital investigations. The synthesized narratives, crafted with such precision to exploit latent anxieties, felt more dangerous than any physical sabotage. Her initial police training had prepared her for visible aggression, for chases down alleyways, but this invisible warfare against shared belief left her feeling adrift. She paced the room, her movements tight with frustration, the polished surface of the table reflecting the relentless energy she poured into every case. She desperately missed the tangible evidence of the power grid crisis, a scorched wire, a faulty valve, things she understood. Here, the evidence was ephemeral, existing only in lines of code and the emotional response of the populace. She remembered her early days at the ZPD, feeling overwhelmed by procedure, and now she faced an enemy immune to procedure. Nick, surprisingly, adapted to the digital battlefield with an almost gleeful cynicism. He found the anonymity and complex layering of the disinformation campaign reminiscent of the most intricate cons he had ever run. It was just a different kind of hustle, played out on a global scale. He leaned back in his chair, one paw resting casually on the desk, looking thoroughly unimpressed by the panicked faces of the overwhelmed tech specialists. "It's just fear repackaged," he drawled, his voice smooth even when discussing algorithms. "They're selling the same old snake oil about us versus them, only now they're using little digital puppets instead of roped carnival barkers." His expertise in reading subtle shifts in body language and tone translated unexpectedly well to spotting inconsistencies in written arguments and recognizing the specific vernacular used by online echo chambers. He began tracking the origin points of the most virulent posts, not through IP addresses, which were expertly masked, but through the cultural fingerprints left by the creators, a certain turn of phrase only used by former residents of Tundra Town, or a particular reference to pre-integration city ordinances, known only to old guard mammals. Their collaboration hit a snag, however, when the digital attack specifically targeted Judy's public image, digging up selectively edited footage of her early, clumsy interactions with predator suspects, framing her concern for victims as inherent species bias. This hit Judy hard. The very legitimacy she had fought for was being weaponized against her. She became withdrawn, spending extra time in the gym, channeling her hurt into punishing workouts, the rhythmic thud of her paws on the speed bag, a necessary outlet. Nick noticed the shift immediately. He saw the genuine distress beneath her determined facade, a vulnerability he felt fiercely protective of. He pulled her away from the case late one evening, not to the precinct, but to a quiet rooftop overlooking the twinkling lights of the financial sector. He spoke without his usual irony, recounting his own darkest moments of being labeled a permanent outsider. They can paint a picture, Carrots, but only you can decide if you step into the frame they built, he told her softly. Your career isn't built on fuzzy videos from 5 years ago. It's built on the badger you took off the grid last month. Their breakthrough came when Nick realized the digital manipulator wasn't just targeting the general populace. They were targeting the infrastructure specialists Judy had recently championed. The disinformation was designed to scare the mid-level technicians, the water engineers and power grid operators, into mass resignations, creating the second phase of the antagonist's plan. Chaos born from neglected systems. Following this realization, Judy used her newfound access to the maintenance bureaus, presenting undeniable proof, not of the digital attacks, but of the systematic neglect Silas had warned about, as a preemptive measure to stabilize the nervous workforce. While Judy secured the city's essential services through transparency and leadership, Nick tracked the financial trail connected to the shell corporations funding the misinformation campaigns, ultimately revealing the architect, a highly respected, seemingly benign public relations executive, a sleek, ambitious hyena, who believed Zootopia's stability was artificially enforced and sought to prove that true success required a controlled return to natural, competitive order, seeing the recent peace as a temporary aberration best corrected by manufactured strife. The ensuing confrontation would require them to trust their instincts again, but this time, the battleground was perception itself. The revelation of the public relations executive, a sleek hyena named Cassian, as the mastermind behind the digital fracturing of Zootopia, sent a cold wave of disillusionment through Judy. Cassian represented the polished, insidious face of prejudice, the kind that didn't rely on overt aggression, but on subtle manipulation of trust. Judy felt a profound weariness. It seemed that every time she fixed a tangible problem, a failing power grid, a clogged pipe, a new invisible rot would take hold in the city's collective mind. Her brief foray into understanding city maintenance had grounded her, but this war of narratives felt fundamentally unfair. She couldn't arrest a bad algorithm or handcuff a cleverly phrased half-truth. She spent hours reviewing the selectively edited videos, the raw sting of seeing her past innocence twisted into evidence of malice fueling her resolve rather than breaking it. Nick, conversely, seemed to relish the complexity of targeting a PR mastermind. He viewed Cassian's operation as the ultimate con job, a grand illusion requiring constant maintenance. He enjoyed dissecting the digital persona, noting how Cassian always used language associated with efficiency and natural selection, echoes of his own past vocabulary, refined and weaponized. Nick's experience in navigating complex social hierarchies, learned from years of hustling various groups, allowed him to map out Cassian's real-world network. The disgruntled commentators, the anonymous investors, the fringe groups ripe for radicalization. He operated mostly off-grid, his laptop balanced precariously on the hood of his unmarked car, parked in discreet corners of the city, fueled by lukewarm vending machine, coffee, and sheer intellectual engagement. He treated the investigation like cracking an unbreakable safe, enjoying the feel of the tumblers falling into place. Their path to dismantling Cassian's operation required a delicate infiltration. Judy, leveraging the trust she had painstakingly built with the utility workers, many of whom were now staunchly loyal after she championed better funding for their forgotten sectors, secured access to the city's primary broadcast nerve center, located deceptively beneath the grand facade of the Municipal Archives building. The plan was to interrupt Cassian's scheduled nightly broadcast, the apex moment when he usually deployed his most divisive content. The infiltration was tense, not because of guards, but because of the sheer technical complexity. Judy, surprisingly adept now with server layouts, navigated the cooling tunnels beneath the building, while Nick coordinated with the few trusted cyber forensics officers, feeding them real-time data on Cassian's digital handshake protocols. At one point, an automated security system, unknowingly programmed by Cassian using outdated safety parameters Judy had only recently learned to counter, nearly trapped them in a lockdown sequence. Nick had to rely on pure improvisation, jamming the ancient magnetic locks with a crudely assembled electromagnetic pulse device made from scavenged parts, the resulting crackle of energy making Judy jump even yards away. The climax occurred as Cassian began his address to Zootopia, a calm, compelling speech about the illusion of peace. Judy, working feverishly at a secondary terminal, didn't try to silence him outright. Instead, remembering the foundational lessons of her career, that the best defense is an undeniable truth, she executed a counter-program designed to overlay Cassian's broadcast with unedited, raw footage from the previous crisis. The moments of genuine cooperation between predators and prey during the power outages, juxtaposed against Cassian's own meticulously crafted, manipulative scripting he had used to brief his online followers. The result was devastating for Cassian. Seeing the stark contrast between the calm, unified image of Zootopia under pressure and the anxious, divisive rhetoric of their supposed unifier shattered the illusion. Cassian, realizing he had been outmaneuvered in the very arena he dominated, didn't attempt flight. He simply stared blankly at the monitor showing his own carefully constructed narrative crumbling into transparent lies. Nick walked in then, not with handcuffs, but with a wry, tired smile. "You forgot one thing, Cassian," he murmured, gesturing towards the resilient, interconnected systems Judy had helped reinforce. "Real community, like good infrastructure, is harder to break than you think." As Cassian was escorted away, the city, momentarily confused by the dual broadcast, began to settle into a deeper understanding, the manufactured fear receding in the face of genuine, shared experience, leaving Judy and Nick standing side by side, exhausted but undeniably victorious in the quiet aftermath of the digital siege. The immediate aftermath of Cassian's exposure brought a strange, quiet period to Zootopia. The sheer scale of the digital manipulation had shaken the city's faith in its own perception, leading to a temporary retreat inward. Citizens were less eager to trust headlines or anonymous social feeds, instead relying more heavily on established local community networks, a slow, organic rebuilding of localized trust that Judy privately felt was a genuine, positive side effect of the chaos. For Judy, this period was characterized by an almost manic desire for tangible action. She felt the abstract nature of the last case had sapped her energy, and she threw herself into community policing, walking the beat in the less affluent districts, listening, not for crimes, but for anxieties. Her stature within the ZPD had cemented. Chief Bogo now treated her not as a promising rookie, but as an indispensable operational asset, assigning her to mentor the next wave of diverse recruits, a task she approached with the same earnest dedication she once brought to convincing farmers that carrots could be friends with wolves. Nick, now frequently called upon by city officials to brief them on threat assessment against digital influence, found himself spending more time in sterile administrative offices than on patrol. The contrast between his old life, the easy thrill of the con, and the tedious reality of governance frustrated him. He often slipped out of meetings, retreating to the city's historic, slightly dusty archives, seeking out the original city charters and land deeds, attempting to find the baseline truth that Cassian and Silas had both tried to twist. He discovered that much of Zootopia's early land distribution was based on deeply flawed, species-biased agreements, and he began quietly collecting these historical anomalies, sensing they might be the key to understanding why these attempts at division kept recurring. His motivation shifted from simply catching the bad guy to understanding the systemic vulnerabilities that allowed them to thrive. He started developing a complex, deeply skeptical profile of the ideal Zootopia citizen, concluding that such a being likely did not exist, which, for Nick, was oddly comforting. Their renewed professional partnership, born from shared exhaustion, centered on the realization that the threats were evolving. First physical infrastructure, then social cohesion, and now, history itself was being weaponized. A new, unsettling phenomenon began to surface. Objects of historical and cultural significance were vanishing from museums and private collections across Zootopia, not for monetary gain, but seemingly at random. A ceremonial spear from the Savannah Territories, an ancient scroll detailing early migration patterns of the Arctic rodents, and critically, the original charter declaring Zootopia a haven for all species, all gone without a trace. This was a targeted erasure of shared memory, a slow-motion attempt to rewrite the city's identity. Judy viewed this as a direct affront to the foundational principles she swore to uphold, feeling personally responsible for guarding the city's narrative. The investigation into the historical thefts led them deep into the shadows of Tundra Town, where the cold seemed to seep into the very bones of the investigation. Nick's familiarity with the area, and his old underworld contacts who dealt in high-end, untraceable antiquities, proved invaluable. They discovered that the thief wasn't selling the artifacts. They were performing elaborate, highly secretive recontextualization ceremonies, attempting to infuse these historical objects with new exclusionary meanings before potentially returning them, irrevocably tainted. The primary suspect emerged as a reclusive, highly educated snow leopard historian who had been publicly censured years ago for proposing radical, segregationist theories about species purity in Zootopia's founding myths. This individual believed the city's current integration was an aberration, and by stealing the symbols of unity, they could force a cultural reset, essentially forcing Zootopia to forget its own journey toward peace and revert to a collection of fearful, isolated territories. The race was on to recover the charter before the snow leopard could complete his final symbolic act of historical vandalism, an act that threatened to dissolve the very legal and emotional foundation of their integrated society. Judy felt a visceral shock upon learning the objects were not being destroyed, but actively recontextualized. The idea of someone systematically poisoning the city's memories felt more invasive than any physical attack. She envisioned the snow leopard historian, likely cloistered away in some forgotten, heavily insulated vault in the coldest reaches of Tundra Town, meticulously twisting the meaning of the founding charter. This was a direct assault on her career's success. Every integration seminar she'd ever given, every stereotype she'd broken down, was predicated on the shared history they were now trying to erase. Her exhaustion was replaced by a sharp, focused anger. She insisted on leading the Tundra Town entry team, needing to be the one to confront the custodian of these stolen symbols. She packed extra thermal gear, but knew the real warmth would have to come from her own internal furnace. Nick's engagement with the historical aspect of the case was complex. The dusty scrolls and brittle documents fascinated him, not because he cared for history, but because he recognized the fragility of narrative. He'd spent his life constructing false narratives to survive. Watching someone else weaponize factual history was an almost perverse mirror image of his own past hustles. He moved through the icy industrial zones of Tundra Town with surprising ease, his naturally insulated coat and predatory grace making him less conspicuous than the brightly clad Judy. He used his old network, not for illicit goods, but for information on where a creature obsessed with purity and historical dogma might hide something so precious. He bartered favors for rumors about secret meetings, eventually tracing the leopard's supply chain. A few corrupt, disgruntled museum staff who specialized in archival transport. Creatures who felt their own species' history was underrepresented in the city's mainstream narrative. Nick's primary role became tactical scouting. He had to map out the historian's defenses, which were designed not to repel intruders with force, but to confuse them with historical traps, false passages layered with archival scent markers, and acoustic baffles that mimicked the sounds of avalanches. The historian, whose name they learned was Zephyr, was indeed operating from an abandoned subsurface refrigeration unit, using the extreme cold to preserve the artifacts while preparing his final ceremony. When Judy and Nick finally breached the location, they found themselves in a vast, cathedral-like space carved out of ice, the stolen artifacts arranged around the central charter, illuminated by flickering primitive oil lamps. Zephyr, gaunt and intense, was not physically imposing, but his conviction radiated an unsettling power. He didn't flee. He stood guard over the charter, calmly explaining his philosophy to Judy. He argued that integration was a temporary, unnatural compromise imposed by weak leadership, and that by cleansing the historical record, Zootopia could return to its natural, dignified state, a polite term for segregation. The confrontation became a test of ideological fortitude. Zephyr attempted to emotionally cripple Judy by projecting manipulated imagery onto the ice walls, scenes depicting past conflicts, framing her own successes as merely delaying an inevitable collapse. Nick, meanwhile, focused on the physical danger. Zephyr had rigged the chamber so that any sudden movement near the charter would trigger a chemical reaction designed to rapidly degrade the parchment of the charter itself. A final, scorched earth denial of shared history. Nick had to employ extreme stealth, moving like smoke through the icy shadows, using his knowledge of animal distraction techniques, a sudden, high-pitched hiss aimed at freezing security sensors to create a narrow window. Judy seized the moment, not by grabbing the charter, but by appealing directly to Zephyr's historical training. She pointed out the flaws in his own source documents, citing the very obscure texts Nick had helped her unearth about the city's true, messier founding, proving that Zootopia was always an act of calculated compromise, not an accident. Stunned by the factual rebuttal coming from the very authority he despised, Zephyr hesitated for a crucial second. That was all Nick needed. He slid forward, not touching the charter, but deftly placing a specialized containment sheath around it, neutralizing the chemical trigger just as Judy moved in to secure the historian. Recovering the founding charter felt like retrieving the city's very soul. Back in the relative warmth of the ZPD headquarters, as the charter was placed under heavy guard, Judy looked at Nick, seeing the reflection of the flickering archival lights in his knowing eyes. They had saved not just the law, but the shared story that allowed the law to exist. The successful recovery of the founding charter brought a measure of stability, yet the ideological wound inflicted by Zephyr lingered, manifesting as a deep-seated unease in Zootopia's governing bodies. The realization that the city's self-image could be so easily targeted forced a reluctant modernization of security protocols. Judy, now a decorated senior officer, found herself elevated to a liaison role between the ZPD and the newly established Office of Historical Preservation, a bureaucratic entity brimming with well-meaning but often impractical academics. She struggled with the political maneuvering required, often feeling suffocated by meetings about acid-free document storage when she longed for the clarity of a high-speed pursuit. Her dedication remained absolute, but her patience for red tape wore thin, leading to several pointed, though respectful, clashes with well-meaning but overly cautious department heads. Nick, surprisingly, found an unexpected niche within the security consultation field that emerged from the chaos. He wasn't interested in preserving dusty relics. He was interested in the why. Why certain historical narratives were more appealing to those predisposed to division. His cynicism, once a shield, had become an analytical tool. He began developing psychological profiles of individuals, seeking to weaponize cultural memory, predicting their next symbolic targets, based on patterns of historical marginalization. He found a morbid satisfaction in using his inherent understanding of deception to anticipate the deceivers. He often brought Judy rare, antique maps he'd acquired during his investigations, not as historical artifacts, but as tangible proof of how boundaries, physical and ideological, were always shifting and often arbitrary, which helped ground Judy when the bureaucracy threatened to overwhelm her focus. However, the relative quiet was shattered by an event that synthesized the previous threats. A series of synchronized, non-violent occupations across Zootopia's vital transport hubs, the main Skyrail terminus, the central pneumatic tube nexus, and the primary access points to the underground water reclamation system. These weren't destructive sieges. The occupants, a diverse coalition of species ranging from disgruntled former city contractors, echoes of Silas's allies, to disenfranchised low-level administrative staff, Cassian's former digital army, were simply sitting down, refusing to move, effectively grinding the city's logistics to a halt. They weren't demanding ransom or policy changes through typical means. They were staging a mass act of passive, systemic non-compliance, declaring that until Zootopia acknowledged the deep, interconnected failures exposed by the recent crises, the negligence, the manipulation, the historical erasure, they would not let the city move. The pressure on Judy was immense. Chief Bogo demanded immediate, forceful eviction, fearing widespread panic as supply lines faltered. But Judy understood the occupiers weren't criminals. They were the city's forgotten functional class, organized by a leader whose philosophy echoed the failures of Silas and Cassian combined. That true change only happens when the entire system is forced into painful stasis. The leader was a deceptively mild-mannered, highly organized capybara, a creature embodying placid resilience, who specialized in industrial workflow optimization. This capybara, named Paxson, believed that only through total nonviolent paralysis could the administration truly see the essential nature of the infrastructure they had ignored for so long. Judy knew that a forced removal would only validate Paxson's narrative of oppression, turning passive protesters into martyrs. The situation demanded not a battering ram, but a radical act of negotiation, requiring Judy to finally apply her deep knowledge of civic infrastructure, gleaned from her preservation efforts, to placate an entire city held hostage by its own essential workers. The tension lay in whether she could convince Nick to trust the slow, bureaucratic route over the quick, tactical one. Judy felt the familiar tightening in her chest, a sensation that now meant not immediate physical danger, but imminent political disaster. The sight of the silent occupiers, a diverse, unwavering tableau of every species from the forgotten sectors, made her hands sweat inside her gloves. This was precisely the kind of problem her rigorous training never accounted for. People refusing to break the law, yet holding the entire metropolis hostage through sheer organized inaction. Her early career, focused on community relations, screamed at her to talk, to listen, while Bogo's booming voice over the comms demanded immediate clearance using specialized riot gear teams. Judy resisted the urge to grab a bullhorn. She knew that any aggressive action would instantly validate Paxson's quiet claims of institutional tyranny. She felt the weight of her seniority now. She was expected to lead, and leading here meant mastering the art of patient, difficult listening. Nick, observing the situation from a secure perimeter monitor, maintained his detached amusement, though it was tinged with genuine respect for Paxson's organizational skill. "Look at that," he drawled to Judy, his eyes tracking the synchronized movements of the protesters as they shared meals and maintained strict silent rotations. "It's beautiful in a deeply annoying way. They aren't breaking the rules. They've just weaponized the rulebook against the people who wrote it. It's bureaucracy, fighting bureaucracy." For Nick, Paxson represented the ultimate systems loophole, a masterstroke of passive resistance that bypassed all the expected avenues of corruption or violence he was accustomed to navigating. He saw the whole scenario as a massive negotiation, and he was eager to use his skills in reading nonverbal cues and identifying underlying motivations to help Judy find Paxson's true pressure point, which he suspected wasn't logistical, but deeply personal. Judy recognized the capybara's strategy immediately. Paxson was forcing the city to look at the foundational maintenance reports she and Nick had fought so hard to uncover after the energy crisis, documents now gathering dust on shelves while politicians focused on the next shiny project. She called for a temporary moratorium on all tactical planning, much to Bogo's apoplectic dismay, and requested permission to establish a direct, mediated dialogue point at the main Skyrail terminus. Her inspiration here came not from police academy texts, but from the memory of her parents running their farm. Sometimes, the only way to fix a clogged irrigation line was to stop the pump, drain the whole system, and talk to the water itself. The negotiation with Paxson was excruciatingly slow. The capybara spoke in measured tones, using flowcharts and Gantt charts as visual aids, speaking the language of operational efficiency that Judy had only just begun to master. Paxson wasn't angry. He was clinically disappointed. He presented evidence of ignored maintenance requests dating back years, showing how the city's smooth facade was only held up by the tireless, underpaid labor of species like himself. Judy realized that Paxson's true goal wasn't to disrupt the city forever, but to force a public, televised commitment to overhaul the entire maintenance budget and grant oversight rights to a worker-led committee. Nick's contribution was crucial in breaking the deadlock. While Judy presented the logistical arguments, Nick leveraged his unique ability to cut through facade. He didn't question Paxson's data. Instead, he used his knowledge of human nature, animal nature, to appeal to Paxson's pride in his own organizational prowess. During a brief lull, Nick sidled up to Judy and murmured, "He doesn't want a committee, Carrots. He wants validation. He needs Zootopia to admit he was right, not just pay him off." Acting on this insight, Judy made a public declaration, not as a police officer, but as a city council representative she had contacted earlier, promising an immediate, independent audit overseen by an external body, with Paxson's expertise officially solicited and compensated at the highest consultation tier. This satisfied the need for validation without handing over the keys to the city's finances. Paxson paused, scrutinized Judy's sincere expression, and then, with a single decisive nod, signaled his people to disperse. The air left Zootopia's lungs in a collective whoosh of relief. As the first Skyrail carriage tentatively moved, Nick clapped Judy on the shoulder, a genuine, unironic smile spreading across his face. "You traded a fight for a blueprint, Hops." "That's smarter than any hustle I ever ran." The anticipated return to the vibrant metropolis of Zootopia in the announced 2025 sequel promises not just a continuation of Judy Hopps and Nick Wilde's partnership, but a deeper excavation of the city's socio-political foundations, themes hinted at but not fully explored in the original. The sequel likely pivots away from the immediate aftermath of the Savannah Central incident, perhaps focusing on the evolving nature of interspecies relations under a new administrative challenge. Judy Hopps, having cemented her reputation as the first rabbit in the ZPD, will undoubtedly face pressure that transcends mere rookie mistakes. Her career trajectory suggests a move toward precinct leadership or specialized task forces, perhaps grappling with bureaucratic inertia that resists the rapid, empathetic reforms she championed. Her defining characteristic, unyielding optimism tempered by surprising resilience, will be tested by issues requiring nuance rather than straightforward heroism. Nick Wilde's arc, conversely, offers a richer ground for narrative complexity. Having successfully navigated his rehabilitation from con artist to respected, if still slightly cynical police consultant, the sequel could explore the inherent mistrust that still shadows him within certain police divisions or even segments of the public. His street smarts, Born from his early experiences selling ice pops and navigating the shadows of Sahara Square, remain his greatest asset. But the film needs to show how he integrates this natural cunning with the rigid structure of law enforcement without losing his essential, roguish charm. A compelling plotline might involve Nick confronting an element of his past criminal network that has adapted to the city's new legal landscape, forcing him to choose between absolute adherence to protocol and the ethically gray shortcuts he once favored. The inspiration drawn from the original film, a deliberate commentary on implicit bias, systemic prejudice, and the ideal of assimilation, will likely manifest in a more sophisticated urban challenge. Given the ecological diversity of Zootopia, a plausible conflict involves resource allocation or zoning disputes between established districts and newer, rapidly developing areas populated by species previously marginalized or segregated. Imagine a conflict arising from the expansion of a high-tech borough, requiring significant ecological restructuring, pitting environmental preservationists against developers eager for profit, forcing Judy and Nick to navigate the complexities of modern urban politics, where the lines between predator and prey are less immediately relevant than the lines between the haves and have-nots. Furthermore, the sequel presents an opportunity to develop the professional evolution of supporting characters. Chief Bogo, a figure defined by rigid adherence to order, might find himself forced to adapt his management style to a more diverse and less predictable workforce, perhaps relying more heavily on Nick's unorthodox insights than he is comfortable admitting. Gazelle's continued role as a cultural icon also offers potential, moving beyond simple endorsements to become an active political voice, perhaps championing legislation related to affordable housing or educational equity for smaller species. Visually, the sequel must surpass the original's detailed world building. We might see deeper dives into previously hinted-at environments, perhaps the subterranean networks or highly specialized agricultural sectors supporting the city. The animation budget will surely be utilized to render textures and movement that further differentiate species interaction, perhaps showcasing advanced biotechnological integration into Zootopia's infrastructure, reflecting a society that is technologically advanced, but still fundamentally wrestling with ancient societal programming. The true success of Zootopia 2 hinges on its ability to use these spectacular settings not merely as backdrop, but as active participants in a narrative that examines whether a diverse society, once it has achieved surface-level peace, can sustain true, equitable integration under sustained pressure. The emotional core of the sequel will undoubtedly rest on the evolving partnership between Hops and Wild. Their chemistry, built on mutual respect forged through shared trauma and a healthy dose of witty banter, needs careful handling. Judy, driven by an almost spiritual belief in the possibility of a perfect zootopia, risks becoming rigid in her idealism when confronted with systemic failures that resist easy fixes. We could see moments where her relentless positivity cracks, revealing the anxiety of carrying the hopes of an entire community of small mammals on her small shoulders. This vulnerability will be what Nick, whose cynicism is actually a shield protecting a deep-seated desire for genuine belonging, is uniquely positioned to address, not with solutions, but with grounding realism. Nick's internal struggle might manifest in moments where the allure of his former life beckons. If the film delves into organized crime adapting to white-collar offenses, perhaps sophisticated scams targeting the city's emerging financial sectors, Nick's fluency in that shadowy language becomes a liability as much as an asset. There might be a scene where a former associate tries to pull him back in, tempting him with the freedom and perceived honesty of the hustle, forcing him to articulate precisely why the uniform, despite its frustrations, now represents a higher form of commitment to the vulnerable populations he once exploited. This emotional tether to his past will deepen his character far beyond the redeemed rogue archetype. Furthermore, the sequel should explore the fatigue of constant vigilance. For Judy, the constant need to prove herself against subconscious bias in every high-stakes situation must be exhausting. Perhaps she develops a strained relationship with a new, ambitious predator colleague, who sees her as an affirmative action hire rather than a peer, forcing Judy to defend not just her competence, but the very principle of inclusion. This internal conflict allows the film to shift the focus from external threats, like Bellwether, to the grinding, everyday psychological toll of being a perpetual symbol. The visual storytelling needs to mirror this growing complexity. Where the first film showcased vibrant, contrasting biomes, the sequel could explore the decay or stress placed upon those environments. Imagine the rainforest district suffering from artificial irrigation failures due to energy reallocation favoring the industrial districts, visible through wilting vegetation and increased humidity that affects delicate species. This environmental consequence becomes a silent character, symbolizing the ecological debt incurred by Zootopia's rapid, often unchecked, growth. The contrast between the gleaming modernity of Tundra Town's new skyscrapers and the strained, overheating conditions in the lower, densified districts would visually represent the sequel's central theme: that true integration requires equitable distribution of prosperity, not just geographical proximity. The emotions of the characters will then become reflections of their environments, Judy striving for the unattainable perfection of a perfectly balanced ecosystem, and Nick observing the predictable pattern of exploitation repeating itself in new forms. The film's narrative energy must ultimately derive from the synergy between Judy's fierce, almost blinding hope and Nick's weary, street-honed skepticism, a dynamic that deepens as the stakes rise beyond simple arrests. Judy's emotional landscape might now include moments of genuine doubt regarding the effectiveness of the system she swore to uphold. Having achieved her dream job, she might experience a form of occupational disillusionment, realizing that changing hearts and minds is a slower, less dramatic process than apprehending a single villain. This manifests not as anger, but as a quiet, persistent frustration, perhaps expressed through overworking herself to the point of exhaustion, relying on sheer willpower where intuition once sufficed. Her sleep patterns, if shown, would reveal a mind too busy planning systemic overhauls to rest. Nick's evolution is centered on redefining loyalty. His early self-interest, once a survival mechanism, is now being tested against his commitment to Judy and the badge. The sequel could leverage his expertise in reading subtle cues, the slight flinch of a normally placid herbivore under scrutiny, the too eager testimony of a well-connected citizen, to uncover a conspiracy rooted not in malice, but in outdated economic privilege. This would force Nick into deeply uncomfortable territory, having to betray the trust of individuals who treated him with a level of casual acceptance during his con days, simply because they represent the entrenched power structure Judy is trying to dismantle. His emotional payoff won't be grand vindication, but small, earned moments of being fully trusted by BOGO or the ZPD brass on a critical tactical decision, demonstrating his merit beyond the shadow of his past. The film's antagonist, or central conflict, should embody systemic complexity rather than individual villainy. Suppose the crisis centers on the automation of city services, spearheaded by a highly efficient, seemingly neutral corporation run by a species known for meticulous planning, perhaps a badger or a beaver. This corporation promises optimized resource management, inadvertently sidelining older, less efficient workers, many of whom are smaller prey species who relied on those service jobs. The emotional resonance here is the fear of obsolescence, the realization that progress, while necessary, can be deeply unkind to those who aren't agile enough to adapt. Judy must fight to protect the jobs and dignity of her constituents, while Nick recognizes the elegant, persuasive logic of the automation proposal, understanding that it is technically superior, even if morally bankrupt in its execution. Visually, the exploration of Zootopia's underbelly must extend beyond mere shadows. If the city's infrastructure is being strained by its rapid expansion, we might see the visual language shift in the districts. The vibrant neon of the entertainment areas could appear harsher, flickering due to energy rationing, or perhaps the normally meticulous Tundra Town ice sculptures begin showing signs of melt and structural instability under warmer environmental conditions. A subtle nod to the ecological pressures Judy previously ignored in her focus on crime. These environmental details serve as external manifestations of the internal strains on the characters. The perfect facade of Zootopia is cracking under the weight of its own success and complexity, forcing Judy and Nick to rely on their hard-won trust to hold the whole edifice together, one nuanced decision at a time. The exploration of Zootopia's socio-economic fault lines necessitates a deeper look at the domestic lives and communities of the main characters, grounding their professional struggles in personal stakes. Judy Hopps, having poured every waking moment into her career, faces the inevitable question of personal sacrifice. The sequel might touch upon her relationship with her family back in Bunnyborough, emphasizing the strain of maintaining connection when her reality is so drastically different from the pastoral simplicity she left behind. A subplot could involve her trying to arrange some form of subsidized, sustainable housing initiative for smaller mammals within the city limits, meeting resistance from established property owners. Perhaps even longtime ZPD colleagues who view such efforts as destabilizing to the existing order. Her inherent kindness, often a superpower, now becomes a vulnerability that cynical operatives exploit, forcing her to learn the hard lesson that empathy must be strategically deployed, not freely given, in political maneuvering. Nick Wilde's evolution demands a more nuanced exploration of his regained standing within the community, particularly regarding predator-prey dynamics outside the precinct. We might see him interacting with a younger generation of streetwise foxes or other formerly marginalized predators who view Nick's success with suspicion. They see him as having sold out to the system he once scorned. This tension offers Nick a chance to mentor, not just advise, showing these youngsters that true power lies in understanding and manipulating the established rules, rather than blindly rebelling against them. His interactions with his past could become less about avoiding danger and more about actively protecting those who can't navigate the bureaucracy, perhaps by setting up an unofficial, strictly ethical consultation service on the sly, operating just outside the ZPD's jurisdiction, a necessary gray area for those failed by the system's official channels. The thematic core of the sequel, when focused on these personal battles, shifts the narrative from prejudice is bad to maintaining an equitable society requires constant, exhausting maintenance. The film could introduce a seemingly benign new technology, perhaps a mandatory citywide biometric identification system designed for efficiency and security, leveraging advanced scent and thermal scanning. While ostensibly beneficial, this system disproportionately affects certain species. The scent blind, those with unusual metabolisms, or species who naturally carry strong, easily detectable aromas, leading to unintentional but pervasive profiling. Judy, seeing the initial data suggesting reduced minor infractions, might initially support it, only to have Nick, through his intuitive understanding of how people are categorized and marginalized, uncover the systematic exclusion embedded in the code. This conflict forces Judy to confront the fact that neutrality in technology often merely reinforces historical power imbalances, making her internal conflict deeply ethical. Does she sacrifice perceived order and safety for nuanced fairness? The resulting emotional climax would see Judy and Nick working together, blending her formal, evidence-based approach with his intuitive grasp of social manipulation, effectively operating as a two-person check against technological tyranny. The introduction of a citywide biometric identification system, while seemingly a pragmatic step towards enhanced public safety, serves as a potent dramatic device to test the limits of Zootopia's much-lauded diversity. For Judy Hopps, this technological imperative represents a profound ideological crossroads. Her natural inclination is toward order and verifiable data. She believes in the measurable reduction of crime. However, her dedication to the marginalized compels her to investigate the system's unseen victims. We could witness scenes where Judy sits in long, tedious meetings, reviewing technical reports, her brow furrowed not in confusion, but in moral exhaustion, as the numbers convincingly argue for the system's effectiveness while the human, or rather animal, cost is hidden in aggregated statistics. Her emotional arc here involves moving past simple faith in the law toward a deeper, earned understanding of systemic injustice, even when cloaked in the guise of progress. She begins to realize that what looks efficient on paper can feel like outright oppression on the ground. Nick Wilde, conversely, finds the system a painfully familiar echo of his past experiences. His inherent distrust of any centralized authority attempting to categorize and track individuals is not theoretical, it's biographical. He would likely approach the biometric data not as abstract information, but as a set of predictable vulnerabilities waiting to be exploited by those in power, or worse, by opportunists who can game the sensors. Nick's investigation would be deeply personal, perhaps involving him deliberately trying to ghost the system, using old evasion techniques refined over years of working the fringes. His greatest emotional strength in this scenario is his ability to see beyond the intended function of the technology to its unintended, discriminatory consequences. The subtle ways a poorly calibrated olfactory sensor might repeatedly flag a specific species of large, nocturnal mammal as high risk, simply because their natural scent signature is strong. His performance would be characterized by a dry, cutting sarcasm directed at the architects of the system, masking an urgent protective instinct for those who cannot afford the complex digital countermeasures now necessary for simple freedom of movement. The supporting cast's reactions will further illuminate the societal rift. Chief Bogo, ever the pragmatist concerned with measurable outcomes, might initially praise the system for increasing precinct efficiency, viewing it as a tool to finally tame the chaos of the city's diverse population. His eventual shift, forced by undeniable evidence of profiling presented by Judy and Nick, would be slow and grudging, rooted in an adherence to institutional fairness rather than sudden enlightenment. Meanwhile, characters like Chief Bellwether's former allies, or other small prey citizens who initially felt unsafe, might cling desperately to the security the system promises, creating a difficult wedge between Judy and her own community base. This division forces Judy to make politically unpopular decisions, risking her career stability for the sake of ethical consistency. Visually, the aesthetic shift would reflect this new surveillance state. The sleek, futuristic design language of the identification hubs would contrast sharply with the messy, organic reality of the species they monitor. Imagine wide shots where the vibrant chaos of the streets is overlaid with faint, almost invisible digital grids, lines of blue or red light scanning crowds. The focus shifts from geographical segregation to digital stratification. The film's climax could involve Nick and Judy having to physically disable a central processing unit, not through explosions, but through a complex, almost artistic act of data corruption or misdirection, symbolizing the triumph of messy, organic life and intuition over sterile, algorithmic control. This sequence would demand seamless integration of their skill sets, Judy handling the physical bypasses requiring official access codes, and Nick executing the rapid, improvisational digital subterfuge required to momentarily blind the omniscient system. The narrative pivot toward technological oversight introduces an element of pervasive, almost invisible threat, contrasting sharply with the very tangible dangers of the previous film. This new challenge requires Judy Hopps to develop a sophisticated understanding of data ethics, a realm far removed from the clear-cut morality of traditional policing. Her emotional exhaustion will stem from realizing that the enemy is no longer a single mastermind, but an entrenched, seemingly neutral infrastructure. We might see Judy struggling with the moral implications of being the very authority figure enforcing a system that is unintentionally discriminatory. Her idealism will be tempered by the cold, hard reality that even well-intentioned regulations create hierarchies. This internal battle could manifest in her developing an almost obsessive need to humanize every case flagged by the biometric system, spending late nights reviewing individual files, trying to argue for exceptions based on context, often to the frustration of her superiors who only see successful compliance rates. Her relationship with Nick deepens here, as he becomes the only one who truly understands the feeling of being digitally labeled and judged before ever drawing a breath. Nick Wilde's engagement with the biometric crisis allows him to fully embrace his role as the insider-outsider. His past as a con artist means he possesses an intimate knowledge of how rules are bent and how data streams can be manipulated through social engineering, not just hacking. The tension for Nick arises when his methods for bypassing the system, perhaps involving exploiting loopholes in species-specific input terminals or using social deception to gain temporary security clearances, are viewed by the ZPD as dangerously close to the very criminal activity he swore to leave behind. Emotionally, Nick must wrestle with the pride of knowing his criminal acumen is now the city's best defense against automated tyranny, balanced against the fear of sliding back into a purely self-serving mindset. A key scene could involve Nick having to use his old charismatic deception skills on a nervous technician, a seemingly innocuous, smaller mammal, to gain crucial access codes, forcing him to confront how easily his charm can be weaponized, even for a good cause, revealing the thin ethical line he constantly walks. The thematic exploration of digital profiling allows the sequel to comment on contemporary anxieties surrounding surveillance capitalism and algorithmic bias. The conflict needs to show that diversity is not just about who is present in the room, but whose needs are prioritized by the operating system. If the identification system is built predominantly on data collected from diurnal, temperate climate species, nocturnal or desert-dwelling mammals will inherently experience higher error rates and increased scrutiny. This shifts the focus of the ZPD's internal review board, forcing them to hire specialists in fields like bioacoustics or thermal pattern recognition, experts who often hold niche, marginalized scientific views to challenge the dominant corporate engineering narrative. This introduction of highly specialized, often eccentric scientific characters will provide much-needed exposition delivered through character-driven clashes rather than dry tutorials. Visually, the environment will reflect this pervasive digital anxiety. The colorful, overlapping districts might now be interconnected by glowing, visible data conduits running along buildings, pulsing faintly with the flow of identification pings. During moments of crisis, when Nick and Judy are attempting to disrupt the system, the visual palette could become desaturated and stark, the vibrant colors of Zootopia momentarily drained, replaced by monochromatic screens and sharp, unforgiving digital schematics. The emotional resonance of the climax would be found in the small, humanizing details breaking through the digital sterility. A single, authentic animal scent overriding a false digital marker, or the sound of unamplified, genuine laughter momentarily disrupting a perfectly calibrated audio surveillance feed, signaling that true community resilience lies in the unpredictable, tangible connections the algorithm fails to measure. The escalating reliance on systemic, automated solutions for complex social problems compels Judy and Nick to seek unconventional alliances, bringing previously peripheral figures into the primary narrative fold. This phase of their investigation will require Judy to engage with the intellectual dissenters, the scientists and technicians whose legitimate warnings about the biometric system's inherent flaws were ignored during its rushed implementation. Her efforts to court these specialists, perhaps a group of nocturnal botanists or geologists whose ecological data contradicts the system's assumptions about urban flow, will test her ZPD authority. She must learn to rely on the expertise of those who operate entirely outside the official chain of command, showing a nascent leadership quality that values intellectual honesty over institutional loyalty. Emotionally, this involves Judy trusting in abstract scientific principles that she